I have met some of you in the last few days, and wasn't it the smoking ceremony quite something the other night? It was really, really good to be linked to the country where we live, where we have a good life, where we have a very good life. Well, we are very lucky. Yes, I've been a chef for 52 years. Seems like a long time. It goes so fast. I'm reading a book at the moment about people that were in concentration camp, and they said that one day is very slow, but 1 week was very fast. And life is very fast. Within us, we have sometimes many opportunities. We need to find the key to those opportunities, and sometimes we need other people to help us. I've been very lucky. I've had a wonderful career. And I think that sometimes I've had such a long career, because it has been a long career. You know, I did my apprenticeship at 16, worked in the Loire Valley in a 1 Michelin star restaurant, so it was very lucky to start at a really high level of cooking. I always feel sorry for people that learn to cook or baking if they work in a place where the standards are very low, because to change from a very low standard to a high standard can be very, very demanding, very difficult. But once you get used to a standard of cooking with very fresh food, cooking with the best possible within your area, using the best technique, learning the choreography of the movements. There's a big, in cooking, like in baking, like in a lot of skills, there's a choreography of movement. And the choreography of movement is doing the minimum movement for the maximum effect. Because when you are a chef and you cook all day, especially if you are my age, you would be very tired very quickly if you do the wrong movements, because you would work twice as much as if your movement was fluid and efficient. So that choreography of movement, to start with, you definitely learn from other people. And there is a memory. I think the most important aspect in our profession is our memory. The memory of movement, the memory of flavor. Sometimes we cook for a little while and you have not, you have with the moment, of course, and that's important. And then suddenly you have finished something, like if, by magic, it has happened because of your memory of movement. Sometimes you smell something, you say, this is ready. It's ready in the oven, the smell. The look in the pan, what's the texture. You don't need to measure all the time or, have the thermometer or things like that. So I did my apprenticeship on the Loire Valley. I came from a family that loved food, seriously loved food. My grandmother, who lived with us, she had been a private cook in a family, and so was a sister. A sister worked in Paris for the Rothschild family. So those women, they were really cooking every day for a number of people with what was fresh, going to the market. My grandmother worked in a mill, in a flour mill. That's interesting, on the side of the river. And she was cooking every day for, like 15 to 20 people, the staff, the family, the children. There was lots of fish in the river. At that time, my grandmother didn't have, she had a notebook, spent lots of time with her. She inspired me. She was really my mentor. That's what we are talking about today. Because she was very lovely. She was very lovely, and she she had a tough life, really tough life. She was born in 1894. She got a job at 13 in that family, helping in the kitchen. She was there for like 7 years. She married in 1914. Her husband went to the war and never came back. So she went back to work and she was there for another 10 years. She became the head cook. And the memory was very important, you know, and of course they would have had people, you know, sharing information. But she encouraged us when we were young to contribute to the family cooking and to take part in a positive way. I think this is really, really important. I will tell you, you know, when you talk like that about a theme, the hope is to plant the seeds, plant the grains, and I can imagine your mind is ticking. I'm saying something that appeals to you, some of it, and then you start thinking about what you may do yourself. So we are planting the seeds today. It will be up to you to water them if you want to reap the fruits of this session. The definition of mentoring is when someone shares their knowledge, skills, and experience with another person to help them progress. So there's lots of lovely words. You know, you give the power to someone to progress, you help them, you share what you know. It is very much like parenting, really, when you think of it. Parenting, the most interesting definition of parenting is when you give independence to your kids as early as possible in your life so they can do things by themselves without you. And mentoring is a bit like that. You share what you know, you give the power, and you let people do. You know, you don't do it for them. It's not like, you know, when you have an essay and you have someone doing it for you. It was interesting, someone last night, don't know if it was you, Kate, someone else was saying, the night before, was saying that years ago when people, when it was difficult to learn, like in my case, as a young apprentice, I worked with an amazing chef, technically amazing. There's been 3 generations of chefs in his family, Michelin star chefs. And, but it was, the way of communication is not as good as what it is now. The chefs didn't communicate very well. It was, you know, like the model of the kitchen was very much like the model of the army. It was really like that. Escoffier, which was a brilliant chef, that great French chef that lived in England and in France, he established a hierarchy in the kitchen and with sections, and amazing organizer, and that was very, very good. But not many of those chefs, including me in some ways, we were not as educated as we could have been because you started early. The restaurant lacked to very young chefs because they could get what they wanted out of them. But they were not very good communicators, so you really had to struggle to try to look at what they were doing. There was no scientific explanation of why there was a reaction when you made a mayonnaise or when you beat egg white into stiff peak. There was no explanation of why the bubbles of air were trapped in the white and why the soufflé rise and all of that. You know, you just learn. But the bonus was that because it was difficult and because the movement was repeated so often, that it stayed into your memory. And some people are saying now that now with the ease of getting information, and it is very easy now to get information on the net, but they say it doesn't stay as much as when you had to do that movement. You know, they often talk for artists, you know, to have worked for 10,000 hours before you master something. When you are working in a bakery, you do get those 10,000 hours in 3 years. And I always tell, I have been a chef for 52 years, but my first few years, because we started my apprenticeship, the first job was to put charcoal in the oven. The first 2 restaurants I worked at started in 1971. It was operating with charcoal, so that was the first thing to do, was to start the stove. And then, you know, before 7 o'clock in the morning, because we had to cook breakfast for the few guests in the country hotel restaurant. And then you finished like at 11 o'clock at night. Sometimes you had a break in the afternoon, sometimes you didn't have. So an apprenticeship of 3 years, it was like working for 6 years in a normal situation. So you did learn a lot. Also, what was interesting in that period is that you got the fish, the whole fish with the guts and everything. You got the pheasants, the wild food with the feathers, the turkey. You know, when it was Christmas, you had to buy, you know, turkey, and you did that in the afternoons. You got the hills, so nothing was processed, and practically everything was local. You didn't get, in my region, we didn't get fish from the Mediterranean region. I'm from the Loire Valley. We got fish from the river, the wild Atlantic salmon. It was caught wild by local fishermen. We cooked lots of local fish, the local vegetables, the local fruits. We got fish from the ocean, the Atlantic Ocean, which was not very far. It only took 2 hours for a truck to come. So we would order at the end of the service. We would sometimes give a phone call and say we need 10 soles and 3 turbot for tomorrow, and it would be dropped at the door the next morning in ice. So a tutor, a mentor is a person that is competent, ideally, someone that you meet. There's 3 types of mentors. There's a one-to-one mentor, and that's usually someone you meet, possibly in a situation like this, someone that that comes to your shop, a friend. That person is usually very kind. There's a fair bit of compassion in it. There's lots of goodwill. That person usually doesn't charge. You know, it's just done like that. I have had many mentors. I know, for example, you may, if you are in Victoria, there's a chef called Philippe Mouchel. He's a really seriously good French chef. He worked with Paul Bocuse, and he's 1 year younger than me. And we have been, I think, mentors for each other. He's really the chef that has spent all his life in the kitchen, many more hours of movement than me. I have spent a lot of hours in the kitchen testing for cookbooks and things like that, but in a different way. But I've learned to communicate probably a little bit more easily than him, because he is so much in his kitchen, so much with his movement. And we developed a friendship, and we did lots of filming together, where I would film some of his recipes and interviewing and things like that. And I think we have been, we have the friendship where we can give a phone call to each other, and I would say, why do we always put garlic, when we cook with red wine? That kind of thing. And he would probably know the answer, that kind of thing. Those little technical questions that I still have, even after 52 years of cooking and writing 24 cookbooks, demonstrating more than 2,000 recipes on television, and I have joined lots of classes over the years. I used to go to lots of Elizabeth Chong cooking classes. at some stage, we had a cooking school where we had teachers from as many countries as possible, because it's, as a chef, you really need to understand, master the mix of spices. As a French chef, French cuisine basically is extremely subtle. It's a beautiful cuisine. It's a cuisine that you can't have in a very noisy place. That's an interesting concept. People, for example, that eat in the food courts in shopping centers, they always choose food that are more salty and sweeter. If I cook some of my fine dishes in a shopping center, for example, I have a dish that I've always done, that I created like 40 years ago, a scallop and carrot soup, where I start with, I chop some shallots, just cook the shallots slightly in a little bit of butter, not much, minimum butter. Then I put some grated carrot, I sweat the carrots, I put a little bit of wine, bring that to the bowl, a bit of stock or water, and then I drop the scallops in it and just poach them. Extremely simple, extremely delicious. The scallops must not be overcooked. Okay, that's the key. If I serve that in the shopping center, people will say, it doesn't taste like anything. They would add this and that and chili and things. If you serve that in a quiet room with your friends, 6 people, 8 people, people would say, this is really delicious. So this is French cuisine at its best. But I'm fascinated by all kinds of cuisine, by the traditions, by the story. And I think as professionals, we need to look at something else than what we do every day. And I think traveling, that's really where I wanted to go. Traveling is one of the things that has given me the most inspiration, no doubt. Going to foreign countries, tasting food, feeling free from the kitchen routine, talking to people, even going to the market. I go to at least 1 or 2 markets a week. The inspiration you get, suddenly you see, oh, those mushrooms, it's time for me to cook them. If you go to the shopping centers, the supermarket, you might be able to cook fresh food, that is okay, but the markets really give you that seasonal thing, that ingredients that you have not used before, the chestnuts that Australians are still not cooking very much, the wild mushrooms that Australians are still not cooking very much, the artichokes that Australians still can't prepare, that chefs don't know how to prepare, all those things that are wonderful, extraordinary food. The multitude of varieties of asparagus that are extraordinary in spring, that are celebrated in Europe, especially the white asparagus and the green asparagus. So a one-to-one mentor is certainly my favorite way of going. But I got lots of one-to-one mentor. When I was a young chef, my chef was famous. He was already doing a bit of television and things like that. But he was a very strong person, and he used to say, I won't send you to college. In theory, we had to go once a week, an afternoon a week, to college to learn what you don't learn in the restaurant you work, basically. That's the basic techniques. And at that time, he said, no, they're going to teach you stupid things there. And so actually never, ever went to college during my apprenticeship. Never. So therefore, I missed on some techniques that you don't learn in the restaurant you work, although there was lots of techniques, like we made puff pastry, choux pastry, we made sweet pastry, savory pastry, we made ice creams. So there was lots of techniques, but there's other things that you miss. And the other kind of mentorship is when there's a mentor sorry for my pronunciation, a mentor for a large group of people. A little bit like this. A little bit like if you join a course at the Gordon College. A little bit of all the demonstrations that are happening with GrAiNZ today, where someone that is kind, someone that is happy to share his knowledge is going to empower people with some little techniques. Sometimes you go to a demonstration and you just learn a small details that becomes really important for you. Cooking is a big puzzle. It's a never-ending puzzle because there's always so much to learn. You know, with writing for magazine, I was the food editor for Better Homes and Garden. I was writing all the recipes for the magazine for about 6 years, you know, where I had to do an enormous amount of research and do that. And after all that experience, I still feel that I know so very little, because musicians are dealing with whatever number of notes. We are dealing with thousands of ingredients, with millions of possible, you know, concoctions that can be all delicious if you know how to make it. So the group mentoring, that's easy. And then there's a distance mentoring, which has become more and more prominent, you know, with the internet, with the classes online, with things you can learn from a distance, which I think is really important. Even Instagram, social media, can be, you know, you can learn a lot. I have enjoyed watching recipes on social media. And it is interesting how dishes, when I started to be a chef, basically there was still a little bit the attitude of there's only one way to make bœuf bourguignon. You know, onion, you know, little bacon, brown the meat, do this, do that, the wine. No. Now we know that there's many ways, many variations. And I think that I must mention two mentors that has been very important in my life, because we all need to find our niche. Our niche. My niche, apart from being able to communicate, you know, sharing what I knew with people, which I think was probably within me, but I have taught sometimes people to present, to introduce what they know well. Because every professional, everyone in this room, even if you're just passionate and making some bread at home and you really want to talk about it, you have got to find the words that are really important within you to express what you want to share. Because there's lots of frustrated professionals because they are so busy in their head. But I think being able to express in words, with a smile, with relaxation, it doesn't matter if from time to time we make a fool of ourselves. We make a fool of ourselves every day, at least once, somewhere. But that communication is really important, especially if you want to find mentors that are going to embrace you. Because there is what we call the law of attraction. The law of attraction is amazing. Sometimes I've been working on a book. I was working on a book years ago that didn't sell much because nobody cared that much. People care, but it could not be marketed properly. How to teach kids to cook. You know, which was basically encouraging them from when they are very little. You know, those 3 or 4 little kids that we see wandering around. That's when you know, entice them to put the apple on the cake, hold the bowl, stir. Lots of parents, you know, think that it is when they are teenagers that they are going to teach them to cook. Forget it. Teenagers, but at that time they don't give they're sick of their parents. But I remember to write that book, I really wanted it to have a sense of correct psychology to the approach, you know. And I remember talking to a friend, Rob Moody. We wrote a book together later on. And he says, go and see that guy. He's a professor of education at Monash. You know, I would never have thought. And I went to see him, and he knew all the layers of the way to approach children, the way to get results, the way to encourage them, to make them stay with you, to make it playful, things like that. So this is really that law of attraction. What I'm saying is that if you want to find mentors, or if you have got to attract them to you by your behavior, by going a little bit forward. Sometimes they will just be there by magic when you need them. Definitely, it has happened to me many times, but you need to do that. So the mentors is patient. This is really important, to be patient. If you are mentoring or if you are being mentored, you need to be patient. You need to listen, and you need to answer the questions that people are asking you. And you need to give the mentees the power so they can find the solutions to their own problems. I'm going to talk a few minutes about this book, Recipes for a Great Life, that I wrote with Rob Moody. Rob Moody is a mentor to me, He's an amazing guy. He's a doctor. He was the head of Vic Health at some stage. He was a Médecins Sans Frontières. He's a professor of global health. So he goes in countries and organizes health system for those poor countries, mentoring doctors and things like that. And one of our sons went to school. Two of our sons went to school together. We became friends, and we decided to write a book together, like 15 years ago, because we felt that in our life there is lots of dimensions. Sometimes when you're a baker, there's dimension which is making bread and being in the bakery early in the morning. The same as a chef. And when last night I was thinking about that because you're aware, the MasterChef judge that died, when was it, on Sunday night or something, Monday morning. And I knew him, a brilliant chef, wonderful chef. His mentor was Marco Pierre White, and he often talked about how Marco, with even his teaching was not always gentle, made him think of something else than his demons. And so in our life, I think it's so important to have a balance. I think that has been my savior. Not that I was a troubled person, but you tend to become so obsessed with your profession that you can neglect your family, you can neglect your health. And I think that's, as professional, even if we think that our job is the most important thing in the world, because we think sometimes that we are changing the world, saving the world, we are contributing. There's no doubt. It's important to contribute just around you. If you contribute around you, you are contributing for the world. So the balance. So we probably decided to, in our many meetings, lots of cups of coffees, we decided to list the things that are important in our life. To start with, we know that we are social beings. No, humans are social beings. So we need other people to nourish us. We nourish them, we exchange. Really important to have social beings. Sometimes it can be professional socials, can be friends. The food, of course, is very important. For me, the food has, of course, been major, but I worked with a chef called Alain Sanderins when I was in my early 20s. It was a 3-star Michelin star in Michelin in Paris, as top as you could go, modern, and very creative. So he was a chef, a modern chef, that says, you need to express your feeling into foods. You need to have a constant evolution. And when my clients come to my 3-star restaurants, top restaurants, I don't want them to feel unwell when they leave my restaurants. He was in the middle of Paris. He used to say, I want them to go for a walk in the street and go on the Champs-Élysées and, sit at the terrace and after dinner rather than going home and says, oh gosh, that was delicious, but I feel so sick. So the responsibility in our professions, there's a big element of health. My job as a chef is to nourish in a positive way with delicious food. So the health aspect needs to be important because the people that you nourishing are going to be healthier. So the food is important. Many years ago, I wrote books for the Cancer Council. I was commissioned at the time because I always approached the family as, teaching, introducing your kids to a wide variety of food. And I wrote those 3 books for them that the 3 books together sold 500,000 copies. So that was really enormous sales, it was the best sellers of that time. Simply because I didn't make it too complicated with technical terms and folate and this and that and this and that. It was simply eat a wide variety of food, of fresh food, wide variety. So vegetables from different colors, from different textures, from different seasons, fresh as possible, okay? No need to be obsessed, completely obsessed and, just cook, no. So eat a wide variety of food. Limit salt and sugar. We need to be careful. The top pâtissiers in my country, in France, the top creators, they are really cutting down on sugar dramatically. They're cutting down on the serve size. I'm never someone that doesn't want to taste something. I became a chef because I love food. But if you are served a slice of cake that is 3 times bigger than it should be, you're not helping anybody. So continue to make your very delicious, rich, interesting things. But if it's the case, the serve needs to be smaller. It needs to be easy to digest. I know at my age that I know when something is not quite right because my system tells me much more than when I was younger, where you just shovel things in. As the more the merrier. So the food, limit smoked food. There's big movement to smoke this and smoke that. You need to be careful with all that food that is smoked and cured with lots of salt and things like that. Need to be careful. Moderation. And learn to cook. I think the most important thing, one of the most important things in our life is to learn to cook well. Definitely. So with kids, give them the basics. Teach them to make a salad dressing. Teach them to mix a few ingredients, to do basic things. It doesn't need to be very sophisticated, but give them the joys of cooking so they will become independent. Everyone can cook. So in my work, I've always been very conscious of my next step. You need to have an evolution in your work. If I can mentor you, Just don't keep doing the same things, because at some stage you'll get bored and you'll be totally passé and things like that. So I wrote the first book. My first book was French Cuisine for Australians, okay? So it was basically French cuisine using Australian ingredients, which was, we self-published. We just survived. We paid for the printing. Nobody wanted to print a book. I was living in Adelaide at that time. I went to see, bookshops and publishers in Melbourne and said, oh no, we have better chefs in Melbourne. So that was the end of the story. So we published with my wife, and we survived. The second book was Family Food, because it was important that a decision is taken at the family level. The Anti-Cancer Council tell me there's evidence that if we don't eat a balanced food, if we eat too much of certain food, we are more at risk of cancers. Okay, so at that time, everyone was focusing on all the people that were getting the cancers, and I said no, it's very difficult to change an older person. You can, of course. People change when their doctors tell them you've got, if you continue like that, you'll be dead in 2 years. So people sometimes stop smoking or doing this or that. But otherwise, it's prevention. So you put good seeds with your kids to eat a wide varieties. I am aware, kids are fussy, okay? There's lots of fussy eaters. I think, it's hard for me to say that sometimes, but I think there's more fussy eaters in Australia than there's in Europe and in Asia, where the food is placed on the table, because there's all that complexity, this and that. It's made too complicated. It should be much more simpler than that. So that food is really important. Exercise, and we covered that. It is so important to exercise. Someone that I met this morning, that person may be here, she said, what's important for you now in your life? And I said, well, what's important is to walk every day. Walking is the best thing. You talk to wise people, and they say, of everything, walking regularly is a good thing. And mentoring and walking is wonderful. What I'm saying, you have a good friend, you have someone you admire in a place like this, go for a walk. Walk 6 kilometers together. You will see the conversation, if you focus on what you want to know, is wonderful. It has been proven, there is an element of when your body is actually working, something are released where you are open, where you are relaxed, where you are breathing. So walking is important. Another aspect in our life, of course, in terms of exercise, is breathing. Totally underestimated. Breathing is really everything. When you are stressed, to go back to your breathing, to meditate on your breathing, to do what they call the triangle breathing. There's lots of techniques, where you breathe in for 5 seconds, breathe out for 5 seconds, and then for 5 seconds, you don't breathe in or out. Or the technique to go to sleep in the middle of the night, it's a bit of the same, where you breathe in for 4 seconds, keep your breathing still, don't breathe in or out for 7 seconds, and breathe out for 8 seconds. This is what I use when when you get older, you wake up at night. Some people can't sleep. I'm lucky I sleep. To go to the loo, and getting back can be tricky if you start thinking, and that technique puts me back to sleep. Not 100% of the time, but 80% of the time. So that breathing is extremely important. I have a mentor that I met by accident. I met a French guy, I'm still friends with him. I visit him practically every week in a nursing home. He's almost 93. He's got dementia. He was the first tenor at the Paris Opera. And I met him at a French function about 25 years ago. And he had seen me on television, and I knew of him. And he came to Australia, circumstances. And he was teaching singing. He had a technique, you know, where you, a particular technique of breathing to get the notes, because singing it's like a wind instrument. You need to have, if you don't breathe properly, you can't get the sound going. So he had the technique where you visualize, you know, and you know, you breathe from the back of your back, and then you let it go up, the breathing, and you go with your hands. So and then you, and so I was talking to him, and he says, oh, you talk in public? He said, why don't you come? I'll give you a few classes so you can be less nervous and help you. Because he said, you know, when you talk in public, the most important thing is that a few minutes or a few seconds before you speak is to go back to your breathing. This is really important, that breathing thing, totally underestimated. I know it may seem totally out of what the topic is, but it's not. It's not, because we need to have all those dimensions in our life. Another dimension that we covered is we need to have some artistic activities, especially if we are professionals. If you make bread, it might be, you know, it might be good to do something else that is in. It is making bread is the art of making bread. It's an art. The texture, you're constructing something, you are making something that is quite amazing. Cooking is the same, the art of cooking. With some ingredients, you have results. You please people with them. And I think it's good for everybody to learn to, I'm sorry, I hope you could hear me when the microphone, to learn to do other art forms. It can be anything. It can be poetry, it can be music, it can be singing, it can be, because I think there's lots of similarities between different art forms. I know, for example, that I've always been interested in singing. I'm not a great singer. My voice is okay, but I just enjoy joining. But I know that there's a lot of similarities between running an orchestra and running a kitchen now. You know, like years ago, the kitchen, as I mentioned before, was based on the army. So the chef said, you do this. Then the sous chef told someone else, you do this, and you do that, and don't ask questions, just do it. The orchestra, the kitchen or the bakery, there's an issue there compared to an orchestra. A top orchestra, all the musicians are top musicians, okay? But the conductor needs to make sure that those musicians are playing the same tune at the same time. The top conductor makes sure that his musicians practice that music and understand it and understand the feeling and the emotions of the music. So together it comes as something quite amazing. And the kitchen is the same now. We need the kitchen, the chef, the chief baker, need to really mentor their people, so everybody from that younger person or the beginner gets to the level of your business as quickly as possible, so it can work as a team. Of course, the young person might not be in charge of proofing the croissant, because that's tricky, or shaping the baguette if you have got to do it by hand. But that young person will start at the beginning and get to a level where he measures or she measures the quantity of flour and water exactly to what you need. So the orchestra and the kitchen are very much similar. You need to have a team of people that works together for the same cause, with a smile on their face. You need to help them, be happy in their work. There's a lot more that I could say. As you can see, I'm not reading notes. So maybe we can have a little time of questions. And if I can't answer the question, someone else in this room, because there's so much intelligence in this room, might be able to answer. Any questions? Yeah.
You spoke before just about, the old-fashioned way of running kitchens, like the army and the hierarchy.
Yeah.
That was how I sort of trained in kitchens as well. But since then, over the past sort of 10 years, I think we've all probably seen a pretty big shift in the way that, people are run and staff are treated and this and that. And I wondered if you had any thoughts on that, and whether that hierarchical training model is still relevant or still current, and how we can, use the best of the past and the best of the future as well, because nobody likes it when you wet their tea towel behind their back or put their tongues in the fryer anymore.
Yeah, but no, you are right. I mean, I was trained. I worked in some kitchens where it was violent on occasions. I was lucky. Two older brothers that teach me to look after myself. No, but seriously, that's why. It has changed. There is still a lot of work to do, a lot of progression to do. The nature of restaurants has changed a lot. When I was young, we were all working more or less on classic dishes, even with a little bit of modernity in it. Now there's often a chef that is very creative at the top level. So he's the only one that knows his cooking. It's very hard. Like if you go to work to places like Vue de Monde or Benchery, those places, it's the cooking of the chef. So that's really important for the chef to share, as I said. It's like a new piece of music where the conductor is going to teach. So the communication is important, the kindness is important, the encouragement, the humor at work is important. And also, I think we need to be very careful in the language we use. When I worked in London, I worked at the Savoy Company and at the Berkeley Hotel. Everything was fucking this, fucking that. It was maybe a way of friendship at the time, you could see, but I think you need to be very careful with the kind of language you use, because at the end it's not very healthy. You really need to avoid, occasionally you can, have a swear word. It's human, it's okay, but not. So the language you use, the clarity of what you do, the training of your people, you really need to train your people. It is the weakness of most business. The weakness is that they are not able to train the people to the degree that would be necessary because they don't have time. They don't have time. Does that answer your question? Yeah? Yeah.
Hi, Gabriel. My name is Annie. My question is, what's your tip for longevity in cooking? Because these days I see so many chefs that they be cooking so early. In the old days we have to move from common chef, demi chef, in the hierarchy in the kitchen to be managing a kitchen. But this as soon as the chef qualified after the apprenticeship, straight into managing the kitchen.
Yeah.
And not long after they left.
It's a long question, but what's the key to longevity? I was surprised when I arrived in Australia to see that people would do an apprenticeship somewhere, especially in country areas. And then they've spent 3 years and they stay 1 more year, 4 years, and then the chef goes, they become the head chef. And that's a big, big danger, because suddenly you are so busy running a kitchen cooking for those people, that you don't have time to be creative and you stagnate and you get burnout and if you are into relationships, it's very difficult. I always tell a younger generation, try to work with really good people for as long as you can until you are ready, until you become a sous chef somewhere, which is often the person doing most, and then work for yourself, but not too early, not too early. So do your apprenticeship of management, of training, of human development and things like that. To run a busy kitchen, when you are early 20s it can work. Some people can manage, but with difficulties. The way to longevity is to get that balance in your life. The things that really wanted to talk, I think that's, with exercise, with your health, with your doing other things than your work, it's sometimes very difficult, especially if you're a young parent. I've always found in the whole of my life, the most demanding part, apart from the early years where basically we were not slaves, but we really work for very little money. But luckily, I survived, and I used the skills that I learned to make a career that has been lovely, successful and long, and it's not finished. But the health aspect of it is really important. The most difficult part is if you are young parents with children, because this is really important. Your family is important. To share what needs to be done. And if you're a chef and a baker, it's very hard. It's very hard. It's a bit unusual. But that's, so you need to work it out so it can work for you. Yeah. Any more questions?
Perhaps one.
Yeah.
Maybe a little bit sort of contentious, not sort of picking up some themes. We were talking about your experiences in London, and it sounds like now it's a little bit more inclusive, a lot more ideas, a lot more people joining the profession. In terms of that, I mean, like you said, a lot more ideas. In terms of the role of the head chef moving on, sort of into the future, do you think that's going to change somewhat? How they run the kitchen, you talked about that military organisation.
Yeah.
But considering now the environment is a lot more inclusive with ideas coming in now, do you think that role of head chef will change?
Yeah, well, there's been a big evolution in the role of the head chef. When I did my apprenticeship, the owner that had been there for 3 generations was in the kitchen every day, cooking. At the time he was 57, it was very lucky. I always considered it was lucky to have a head chef of 57 whose father had worked with, people that had worked with Escoffier and things like that. So the people were in their kitchen. So now there's still head chefs like that, like Philippe Mouchel, my friend, is still in his restaurant. Sometimes I go and see him at 11 o'clock. He's chopping the shallots, and at lunchtime he's helping in the kitchen. He's at the pass. And then in big establishment, of course, the head chefs are purely organizers doing the ordering. They don't cook anymore. They rely on their sous chef. And then there is the head chefs, like a number of them we know now in Australia, that have got 3 or 4 restaurants, and they run those 3 or 4 restaurants from their office. They might work on some menu with second chefs and things like that. But it is true, like when I see Philippe, my friend, that is such a good chef, but suffering enormously with health issues. It's true that, I can tell you I'm 68, I could not see myself in a kitchen at the stove at my age. It's retirement age, okay? I'm in bracket. But there's a moment where at 68, you can be as creative and, you can be a wonderful manager and, you have got your head on your shoulder, and if you're healthy, everything goes well. But physically, it would be stupid, I think, to still be cooking at the stove for many hours day because you are going to affect your health. So at some stage, the chef needs to really be a good manager and have people around him or her to do that hard work. There's no doubt that I always felt that, you know, the most productive chef, you know, that the chef, you need to work fast. As a chef, speed is really a big thing. Between the professional and the non-professional, you see how you know, you need to work fast. So that's really between the age of 25 and, you know, and 55, ideally. Okay, I think we have done the bit.
Thank you so very much, Gabriel, for an incredible journey on mentorship with such engaging anecdotes from your own career and its considerable breadth. If you'll join me in thanking Gabriel.